22nd June 1941, the day the earth shook, as dawn broke, over 3 million German soldiers surged eastward in the largest land invasion in human history, Operation Barbarossa. Among them was a young panzer gunner named Richard Freiherr von Rosen. What began as a thunderous blitzkrieg across the Soviet frontier soon became something else entirely, a brutal, unforgiving battle for survival, where steel, mud, and fire swallowed entire divisions. This is not just the story of tanks and tactics. This is the true first-hand account of what it meant to live and almost die inside the belly of Barbarossa. In the evenings before the invasion, I was sent from 3rd Company with 4 men to 4th Company, where Oberleutnant Kraus gave us a crash course in Russian. We scribbled down the Cyrillic alphabet by hand and tried to learn a few basic expressions that might help during operations. But truthfully, none of us understood much more than the shapes on the paper. It felt surreal, almost theatrical, like we were preparing for a role we didn't fully understand. Then came the evening of the 18th of June. Our company was assembled under the fading light. The commander stepped forward with serious eyes and told us that the operation, what we had been training for these past months, would begin in the next few days. The mood shifted instantly. He informed us that we were to serve as the spearhead. Our job was clear: push rapidly through thick, swamp-ridden woodland to the town of Cobrin, 60 kilometers past the border. The enemy's strength was unknown, and our lead tank was number 114, commanded by Unteroffizier Probst. That night, we were no longer boys in drills. We were men on the brink of war. Extra sentries were posted in case the Soviets launched a preemptive drop. June 20th began with a regimental roll call. The entire Panzer Regiment 35 formed into a triangle, standing rigidly in formation as Oberst Eberbach addressed us. His words were strangely blunt. He told us that we were entering a land so primitive we wouldn't believe it. A place where, in his words, they don't even have proper toilets. Whether it was meant to calm us or instill superiority, I couldn't say. But the speech ended with a moment of silence as we remembered our fallen comrades from Poland and France. Then wordlessly, we returned to our quarters. By morning on 21st June, the final preparations began. We packed every personal belonging into our panzers. Space was brutally limited. Behind the turret was the so-called rucksack, a metal container where each crewman could stow a single travel bag, his overcoat, and a few personal effects. A second bag had to be surrendered ahead of time for transport in the divisional baggage train. At the rear of our vehicle sat the wooden trunk we jokingly called the brochure trunk. It held blankets, ground sheets, and unofficially any extras acquired during the march, souvenirs, food, whatever we could collect. Ammunition boxes were fixed to the track covers, and field flasks were hung from wire loops on the rucksack for easy access. That day, we received our special invasion rations. We packed them into the engine and fighting compartments with care. Each man received 3 tins of rice or vegetables, 5 sacks of bread, 3 boxes of Coca-Cola chocolate, and a miniature stove. None of it was to be touched without express orders. It was just past midday when we finally assembled. At 1600 hours, the company gathered one last time for a short, humorous send-off speech by the commander. After that, we mounted our panzers, now towed out of the woods and lined up neatly on the highway. By 1700 hours, the Abteilung HQ rolled past, and we followed through Wohin and onwards toward Brest-Litovsk. Our destination was a thick woodland area just north of the town, about 3 kilometers from the river bug which marked the border. As we drove through the vast forests, we passed colossal fuel dumps laid out by the Arad. The Arad boys lined the road, watching us with envy and admiration. They looked like they wanted to be in our place. Night came, and our drivers had to navigate blindly through the darkness. Occasionally, we halted for technical checks. I tried to sleep in my gunner seat, though comfort was out of the question. The metal was hard, the seat narrow, and my legs too long. Sleeping upright took practice, but eventually exhaustion wins over discomfort. Around midnight, I awoke to find that we had reached our readiness zone. The individual tanks were guided to their concealed spots. Engines were checked, barrels cleaned, oil drained, and camouflage netting expertly applied. Tracks were covered. It was all becoming very real. We were told to keep watch for enemy aircraft. Once all tasks were completed, we stretched out to rest. If the code word came, we would begin at 3:15. If not, we would wait. Sleep was shallow if it came at all, and then it happened. 22nd June 1941. I must have dozed off lightly, but by 0300 hours, no one was asleep. The tension was thick in the air. We stood in silence, eyes on watches, breath held. Then, at exactly 3:15, the night exploded into chaos. Our artillery erupted with a deafening roar, dozens of 10.5 centimeter guns thundering close by, flinging fire and steel across the river. The sky turned red, lit up in all directions. The Soviets were caught entirely by surprise. They didn't fire back. Nothing came. After about 30 minutes, the intensity dropped, picked up again, and then faded to the faint echo of machine gun bursts across the bug. Our infantry had already crossed the river, establishing a bridgehead. Then, at around 0400, we assembled again to hear the commander read aloud the Führer's order of the day to the German Army of the East. The hour of the crucial test has now arrived. Upon you lies the responsibility of saving the culture of Europe from Bolshevism. Our support units, what we called the Tross, had not advanced as far as we had. A panzer company wasn't just made up of combat crews. There was the battle group itself, the Gefechtstross including the field kitchens, and then Tross 1 and 2. Tross I handled repairs, communications and ammunition. Tross 2 was more comprehensive. Office staff, motor pool, clothing, rations, motorcycle couriers, medics, and more. Our morale was high. The men were alert, focused, even eager. The thrill of movement buzzed through us like electricity. Around dawn, a final delivery of field post arrived. Letters from home, small comforts from a distant world. Still we waited. The infantry had secured the eastern bank, but the engineers were still building a makeshift bridge. It was only by midday that it was ready. At 1300 hours, the signal came through. First company, mount up, move out. As soon as our engines rumbled to life and we pulled onto the main road, a new battle began. Not against the Soviets, but against the dust. Thick clouds of dirt engulfed us as convoys converged from every direction, all funneling onto our highway. Without the protective goggles we had been issued, we would have been blinded completely, but we pushed on. We had priority. We were the tip of the spear, the first wave, the hammer that would strike the opening blow of this colossal new war. And from that moment forward, the world we knew was behind us. Ahead lay the unknown, swamps, forests, fire, and steel. The Eastern Front had begun. The road to the front was slow and choked with traffic. There were several halts along the way due to congestion, with supply vehicles, tanks, and infantry all funneling toward the same river crossing. At one of the stops, we encountered the first German wounded we had seen in this campaign, an Unteroffizier and a Gefreiter from Schützen Regiment 12 of the 4th Panzer Division. Their wounds were light, an arm in a sling, a bandaged forehead, but their faces were drawn, grim. They described the swampy terrain on the far side of the bug and how it had turned into a nightmare for the infantry. Progress was agonizingly slow, they said. The Russians were clever, using the marshes and forests to their advantage. We reached the makeshift pontoon bridge over the river Bug by about 1500 hours. The river was roughly 150 meters wide here and already under strain from the endless stream of men and steel that had passed before us. The bridge had partially buckled. We waited for more than an hour until it was reinforced and deemed passable. By 16:30, it was finally our turn. As we rumbled over the pontoon span, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. This was it, Russian soil, the threshold of the unknown. I took a slug of cognac from my canteen. We all did. No cheers, just silence. Not long after crossing, we saw our first Soviet prisoners being marched west under infantry escort. Their uniforms were surprisingly well made, though caked in marsh mud, which made for effective camouflage. The terrain was soft, treacherous. We had to be cautious not to bog down. Somehow, the company made it through intact, and we regrouped in proper formation. The woodland ahead had already been cleared by our infantry, littered with abandoned Russian equipment. They had pulled back fast, leaving helmets, rifles, and even warm soup cans behind. After 5 kilometers, we halted, allowing the Abteilung to form up. Major von Laukert, our commander, came forward and assessed the lead elements. Our first company was reinforced with 3 additional panzer rifles, each armed with a 7.5 centimeter main gun and twin machine guns. We were preparing for the drive to Cobrin. Resistance was expected. Our spearhead panzer 114 was commanded by Unteroffizier Probster. Behind him came Lieutenant König and the company commander's vehicle, followed by the 3 new Panzer IV. Then the 2nd platoon, the light platoon, and the 3rd platoon brought up the rear. Trailing us were companies 2, 3, and 4, along with the 2nd Abteilung. Support elements, anti-tank detachments, pioneers, artillery, and more rounded out what was now called Assault Group Eberbach, named after our regimental commander, Oberst Eberbach. He had already earned the Knight's Cross in France and would later receive the Oak Leaves for his success here in Russia. By dusk, around 2100 hours, we rolled out into deepening twilight. Open fields spread before us, the sun melting below the horizon. Behind a hedge, I saw my first dead Russians. The bodies were sprawled, contorted in unnatural shapes. I had imagined this moment would bring satisfaction, maybe even pride, but instead it felt hollow. I stared, then looked away. We expected an ambush behind every thicket, every tree line, but the enemy was nowhere to be seen. We followed forest trails, the radio crackling as the lead panzer transmitted updates. Every vehicle had at least a receiver, some had full transmitter sets. Communication was steady. The night grew darker, and I leaned back behind my gun. With nothing visible in the scope, I drifted off to sleep. My loader, Gefreiter Aschlemann, was already snoring softly beside me. Our new commander, Feldwebel Volz, stood in the turret, speaking to our driver, Gefreiter Jenschek, through the intercom. Visibility was near zero. It was pitch black, and the dust thrown up by our own movement choked the slits in the driver's viewfinder. The commander had to guide him manually, left, right, slow, stop. During one halt, I stepped out and sank ankle-deep into fine, powdery sand. We continued along narrow trails through dense woods, the convoy moving steadily. Soviets had clearly been trying to upgrade the road toward the frontier. By 02:30, we resumed the march. Dawn broke on the 23rd of June with a grey sky, and we made swift progress until another bottleneck. Every few kilometers, we had to divert off the Rollbahn to bypass bridges the Soviets had reinforced for heavy tanks. Most were unusable for us. At the first villages, we saw strange wooden portals marking the entrance, lattice frames decorated with dried fir branches left over from May Day. In the center, a faded portrait of Stalin stared blankly at us. Each village featured a crude pulpit for Soviet speeches. But the locals, they were friendly, almost eager. They came bearing eggs, milk, and butter, waving as we passed, eyes wide with curiosity. We were like Martians to them. By 0900 hours, the silhouette of Cobrin came into view. 15 minutes later, we reached its outskirts. We had advanced 60 kilometers overnight, a triumph considering the conditions. But our mood soured when we learned that 3rd Panzer Division had already captured the town. They had permanent bridges at their disposal and crossed the Bug without delay. We, who had slogged through the marshes, were now relegated to second wave. We parked our panzers in a large garden, camouflaged thoroughly, and began maintenance. Fuel hadn't yet arrived. The commander sent a Panzer II to scout a rumoured supply warehouse. I wandered into the town myself, unarmed, my pistol left back at camp. That was a mistake. I quickly realized I was the only German around, and the locals here weren't all so welcoming. When I noticed a group of rough types eyeing me, I backed away and returned toward the center. There, I found a group of our men, breaking into a kiosk. I helped myself to a sack of cigarettes and soap, items that would become gold among the crew. Our tank received 30 bars of toilet soap. Others brought back blankets, boots, enamel pots, and even butter and Dutch cheese. At midday, we were finally allowed to open our special rations. Just as we began to eat, an order came: refuel and roll out. We crossed the town square, passing a giant plaster statue of Lenin, flanked by 2 Soviet tanks. Every town, it seemed, had statues of Lenin and Stalin, sometimes seated together on a bench like old friends. We reached the railway yard, where a massive fuel dump awaited. We grabbed water, oil, fuel, whatever we could use. Refueling was chaotic. Soviet setups were crude and gave us some trouble, but we made it work. Nearby, we laid out our spoils and shared everything fairly: clothing, gear, and the prized butter and cheese. With no bread, we simply spread butter on thick slices of cheese. It was heaven after days of dust and rations. By evening, we were on the move again. 3rd Panzer Division was already engaging Soviet tanks east of town. We passed their burned-out wrecks, Russian machines, blackened, twisted, still smouldering. Orders came in. Our company was to secure a sector 10 kilometers beyond Cobrin. As darkness fell, we reached a wooded area and began camouflage preparations. But just as we finished, a new order redirected us. We moved again, the night now pitch black. Fires dotted the skyline, wrecked Soviet armor, still burning. Toward midnight, we reached a farm and set up camp. 2nd Platoon stood guard while the rest of us finally got some rest. I pulled straw from a barn and lay behind my Panzer, warm from the engine's heat, wrapped in a looted sleeping bag. It was the best sleep I'd had in days. At 0400 hours sharp, revel. 10 minutes later we were on the move again. There was no time for coffee or washing. Dust clung to our skin like a second uniform. We looked like coal miners. We rejoined the roll barn, and what we saw was beyond words. Russian tanks burned to husks, some with gaping holes, others flattened by aerial attack. Artillery pieces, destroyed trucks, and debris lay everywhere. It was like a junkyard of war. We pressed forward until 1,000 hours and halted again. These long drives were brutal on the drivers, but to us in the turret, it was a kind of peaceful madness. We had fashioned a couch from leather scraps and lounged with our field flasks in hand, watching the wreckage roll past through dusty goggles. A slice of bread with butter was enough to lift your spirits. In those strange hours, in the strange heat, with the roads of Russia stretching endlessly ahead, we almost forgot the danger. Those were the finest hours, for men who didn't yet know how bad it would get. As night fell, we rolled out again, engines humming in the darkness. I climbed up onto the hull, found a spot at the rear of the Panzer, and drifted into sleep beneath the stars. The steel was hard, but the fatigue ran deeper than any discomfort. It was one of the best sleeps I'd had in days. At first light, I awoke to the same desolate sights on either side of the highway: forest, swamp, ruined roads, the debris of retreat. By 1,000 hours, the order came through. Our company was to secure a bridge against expected Soviet air attacks. We arrived shortly after and took up position, but the ground was wide open. There was no cover, no concealment, and camouflaging a tank in open terrain was near impossible. An 8.8 centimeter flak battery had been positioned nearby to defend the bridge. Its long black barrels pointed skyward. Word had already spread that the Soviets might attempt to capture or destroy the bridge at any cost. The vehicles were in poor shape after the long run. Every track link, every air filter, every weapon had to be checked. We fueled up again, cleaned the guns, and inspected the suspension. Just as I rolled up my sleeves to finally have a proper wash, our first in days, the flak battery opened fire. We looked up to see 6 Soviet bombers at high altitude. They quickly turned under fire and vanished, but not for long. 15 minutes later, they returned, and this time they dropped their payload right onto the flak position. The explosions shook the ground, sending smoke and dust into the air, though surprisingly little damage was done. But the flak crews were on target. One bomber took a direct hit and plunged toward the earth like a screaming comet, a wing detaching mid-fall and spiraling down like a burning torch. It was the first aircraft I ever saw shot out of the sky. We stared in awe until another wave came. This time the bombs exploded closer between our widely spaced panzers. Our chief radio operator, Gefreiter Hildwein, took a splinter to the knee. Until that moment, most of us had watched the attacks in a kind of naive curiosity, out in the open, heads craned skyward. That changed fast. The commander ordered everyone to dig foxholes beneath the panzers. We hacked out square pits, laid down blankets, and then carefully drove the tanks back over them. If another wave came, we would scramble under our machines like rats, and when it did, you'd be amazed how fast grown men can move. The moment that whistle of bombs started falling again, we scattered and slid into those holes with monkey-like speed. There were 6 separate air raids that morning. The Soviets lost 3 planes brought down by flak or fighters overhead. In the lulls between attacks, we tried to pass the time. The mosquitoes were relentless, so we lit small fires and played cards. I lost 20 Reichsmarks in one sitting. Others lost hundreds. It was absurd. Money seemed meaningless now, just paper passing between dust-covered hands. Eventually, the order came down. Gambling was now officially forbidden, probably for the best. The rest of the day passed in silence. No more air attacks, not even during the night. The next morning, 26 June, we went to full alert status, but again, nothing happened. The waiting was worse than the fighting. Nerves wore thin. We were tired of sitting, tired of idling in place. Then, finally, at 1100 hours, the order came through. Prepare to move out. We loaded everything quickly, faster than we ever had before. Just half an hour later, we were back on the roll barn, rolling east once again. At around 1500 hours, a new command crackled over the radio. Go to battle readiness. Weapons were unlocked, safety catches off. Our mission was to capture a nearby Soviet airfield and secure it for Mulders's fighter squadron. We veered left off the highway and took a narrow trail through the woods. The dust was overwhelming. Even with the hatches closed tight, it crept into the crew compartment like poison fog. Visibility was non-existent. For the drivers, it was like driving blind into a grey cloud. I could see nothing through my gun sight either. We joked darkly about what would happen if we were ambushed now, blind and boxed in. But no one panicked. The march continued 20 kilometers into the unknown. Along the way, we passed our artillery batteries hammering the airfield ahead. The pressure built with every minute. Any second now, we expected contact. But as the woods cleared, a different sight met us. The Soviet airfield lay dead before us. Wrecked aircraft littered the field, some still burning, others just twisted husks. Mulder's men had clearly struck first. Not a single Russian was in sight. We fanned out in combat formation, scanning the tree lines in case the enemy was hiding nearby. We put the woods under suppressive fire, better to be safe. As darkness fell, we withdrew from the field, cleaned our weapons in silence, ate in a half circle beside the panzers, and fell asleep where we sat. Reveille came early, 27 June, 0230 hours. We were up before the stars faded. Despite the short sleep, we felt ready. The commander gave us the day's mission. We would make a feint across the airfield while the rest of the regiment swept around to pressure the town of Baranovichi. At 0300 hours, we moved out. The alert was sounded again. At high speed, we spread out, fanning across the airfield. Soon we were caught in marshy undergrowth and had to reroute, stumbling past a large Soviet fuel depot, later discovered to be heavily mined. Some of our tanks had passed within meters of disaster. Enemy artillery opened up, accurate, fast. We were certain they had a spotter guiding them. Shells landed close, and even inside the safety of the Panzer, each explosion made us flinch. We scanned the horizon and saw a water tower that seemed suspicious. A few well-placed rounds silenced it, and with it, the artillery. We pushed onward. Just outside Baranovichi, we stumbled across a field of 8 brand-new Soviet anti-aircraft guns. They hadn't even been fired. A prize. Then came new orders. Prepare to bombard the town. But within minutes, that was cancelled. Second Company had already entered it. We rolled into Baranovichi cautiously. The streets were eerily empty. Somewhere along the way, our Panzer got stuck in a deep hole. Our driver wrestled with the gears and by some miracle got us out. But the company had gone ahead. We drove frantically through the ghost town, unsure where they had gone, eyes darting at every alley, expecting an ambush. Eventually, we re-established contact by radio. The company had pushed past the town and into a patch of forest, where they came under fire and silenced it with machine gun bursts. Our own MGs weren't perfectly zeroed yet, new mounts, still stiff. We made a note to correct that at the first opportunity. Then came another transmission. The 18th Panzer Division was in the area. Bialystok was now encircled. We turned around and returned to Baranovichi. The town had seen little damage, only scorched corners and broken windows. We halted in the centre. One man was left behind on each panzer for guard duty, while the rest of us spread out to organise supplies. Not far off, we found a warehouse. Hundreds of crates were stacked inside. We forced them open with bayonets. Bottles of wine, mineral water, vital in this heat, bars of chocolate, candy, tins of cream. It was a treasure trove. Every tank crew returned loaded down with loot. I carried a sack of sweets and drinks back to our Panzer, laughing for the first time in days. And in that moment, amid wreckage, heat and war, we felt strangely like kings. Crates were cracked open and smiles were everywhere. Crews traded goods between vehicles, and each man eventually got something he wanted. Chocolate, liqueur, even silk scarves made from looted women's clothing. I stumbled across a stash of fine liqueur tucked deep in a wooden chest and tucked a few bottles away like treasure. Meanwhile, 18th Panzer Division rolled past us through the city in full battle order. They didn't even get the chance to stop. Their faces were long, almost comical, fully armed, alert, boxed in by support units, while we strolled about in dusty tunics and looted underwear like conquerors. They looked like they were headed into war. We, somehow, were already past it. One of our scouts had found a clothing store. From it we took shirts, socks, even women's garments to wrap around our necks. Washing laundry was a thing of the past. Anything dirty was discarded and replaced. And just when we thought the day couldn't get any more surreal, Feldwebel vaults discovered 4 giant barrels of beer. We kept one for ourselves. From that moment on, we drank on the move. Half the time we didn't know where to store all our loot. Our Panzer looked like a gypsy wagon. It wasn't exactly in line with military discipline. After 3 hours under the broiling sun, we turned back, crossed the city again. By now the civilians had started to creep out onto the streets, waving timidly from doorways. An hour later, we returned to the captured airfield. Fighter planes circled overhead. Mulder's men had begun to land. Dead Russians lay scattered across the field, but strangely, we were becoming used to it. What once froze the blood now passed by without comment. We continued on for half an hour until the company stopped in woodland. Mosquitoes descended like smoke. We built small fires, but they were useless. The heat was merciless. My MGs were finally calibrated. At least the armourer tried his best. Then a rare treat, field post, arrived, but I received nothing. That night we curled up near the Panzer, filthy, exhausted and reeking. Tomorrow would be my birthday. I lay on the hard ground and wondered about my family. How were they? Were they safe? Did they know where I was? At 0100 hours, the world jolted back to life. A sharp order snapped us awake. We were moving out. Groggy and aching, we boarded the Panzer in darkness. I remembered, vaguely, that it was now my 19th birthday. 2 hours later, we halted. Dawn was breaking. I closed my eyes again. In the morning, I put on a fresh pair of Russian underwear. The old ones tossed away like everything else. We were finally allowed a quick wash. Each man received a quarter of a bucket. The water turned brown in seconds. My loader, Walter Ashleman, went off on one of his infamous poultry hunts. He returned triumphantly with a chicken he'd shot. We plucked it, built a fire, and began cooking it in our wash bucket. The smell was incredible. Just as the meat was nearly ready, I heard a loud bang, then a thud. I turned and saw Ashleman collapse from the Panzer, blood pouring from his midsection. He'd been cleaning his pistol, and it went off, shot clean through the stomach. A dispatch rider flew off for help, and within 10 minutes the company medic arrived, followed by an ambulance. They patched him up and raced him to the main station. Somehow they saved his life, but our mood turned black. My birthday was forgotten. No one touched the chicken. I was assigned a new loader. Around midday, we moved out again. The dust returned with a vengeance, choking our throats, burning our eyes. Even the goggles were no help. Dust seeped through every seam, every crack. By 0400, we reached the same roll barn we'd used days earlier and turned east. Several panzers had to fall out for repairs. Russian fuel had wreaked havoc on their engines. We pressed on, numbers reduced. The wreckage beside the roll barn was endless. Burned out trucks, shattered guns, broken tanks. Was everything in this war destined for destruction? Fuel trucks caught up to us, and we refueled during a short break. Then the sun dipped again, and darkness took the sky. Night movement was always brutal. I stood in the turret, guiding the driver with my throat mic while the others dozed. My back ached, my eyes strained. We rolled through the black until 0500. We arrived at Slusk as dawn broke. The outskirts featured a strange stadium. Plaster figures painted blue and white in some bizarre Bolshevik style. Of course, Lenin and Stalin stood in effigy, like everywhere else. We paused for half an hour. A shop was ransacked, but had already been picked clean. Then we clattered through the miserable cobblestones into the town centre, party buildings on every side. At the centre of the square stood a massive pulpit, with reliefs of the October Revolution carved into its face. Statues of workers flanked it, and above them all loomed Stalin, larger than life. Loudspeakers hung on every corner, propaganda central. The town was mostly intact, but certain districts had been burned out, likely by the Soviets themselves. From the rubble rose only chimneys and steel ovens. We continued along the roll barn, reaching 40 kilometers per hour. By 0600, we stopped in a small village. The dust had again choked our air filters. Cleaning them took 2 hours. Then a reward. The quartermaster rolled out crates, thousands of eggs. We could help ourselves. I boiled 100 for our crew and packed them in an empty ammo box with 50 raw ones. Then, foolishly, I cooked 20 eggs into an omelette and ate the whole thing without oil or fat. My stomach rebelled. I spent the next few hours retching violently, stretched out across the back of the Panzer, miserably using the floor hatch more than once. It took us 3 to 4 hours to reach the airfield where Mulder's squadron was based. A disappointment waited. We were still behind, 3rd Panzer Division, on the roll barn. We were supposed to be the leaders, but fate had other plans. At midday, the command Panzer, number 100, broke down. Engine damage. With von Kossel now dismounted, he joined our panzer and assumed command from my seat. Our driver Volz moved down to the controls. I remained the gunner, now for the company commander himself. I felt a rush of pride. It was an honor. Toward evening, Soviet aircraft approached the airfield, but our fighters rose fast. 7 enemy planes were shot down before the sun set. The mood was electric. Our boys in the sky circled above our Panzer as if guarding it. That night we swatted mosquitoes and tried to sleep. The next day, June 30th, followed the usual camp routine. We didn't move until the afternoon, when we returned to the Rollbahn, but again it was clogged. Convoys moved side by side, overtaking was impossible. News came that 2nd Abteilung had orders to branch off left, trying to overtake 3rd Panzer Division. We were desperate for action. That evening we reached a small village. We took turns standing guard along the highway. In the twilight, we changed the oil and camouflaged the tank near a garden. At 2:34:50, we were woken by sentries and formed up to congratulate the commander on his 24th birthday. Bottles of cognac and champagne were passed around. A brief toast, some rifle salutes from the forward posts, then back to sleep by 0100. We had to move at 0500. July 1st. We neared the Beresina River. I couldn't help thinking of Napoleon. He had made it to Moscow only to be destroyed in the retreat. Would we face the same fate? Would I cross this river westward again, or was this a one-way path? Our advance was halted, resistance near the river. Battalion Hoffmann was bogged down by a Russian armoured train. No. 6 Company was sent to assist. We left the Rollbahn and crossed a bridge the Soviets had tried to destroy overnight. Rain made the tracks boggy. We had to tow motorcycles and trucks through the mud. By midday we reached Svislok, and not long after, the Beresina. Just a kilometre from the river, we passed a wrecked platoon of Soviet tanks, blackened husks. 2 bridges were still intact. The Soviets had tried repeatedly to establish a bridgehead, but our quadruple flak guns obliterated them each time. We would cross using the railway bridge, where wooden planks had been laid between the tracks. Our battalion halted in woodland beside a 15-centimetre howitzer battery. As evening came, the battery opened fire. We rigged tarps into a giant tent behind our Panzer, trying to settle in. That night it rained hard. The trench around our tent hadn't been dug properly. Water poured in. We woke one by one, backside soaked, and climbed into the Panzer. It was cramped. 5 men in that space made sleep almost impossible. We froze in our wet clothes. There is no misery like that of being soaked, exhausted, aching, and forced to sleep sitting upright. You doze for minutes, then wake in pain. Morning brought sunshine. We dried what we could. To make up for the ruined night, we threw a picnic to celebrate the commander's birthday properly. Blankets laid out, wine uncorked, pork chops, bread, butter, eggs. A pig had been brought in by motorcycle, and frying pans looted from a nearby town. The meat sizzled over small petrol fires. At that moment, we had everything: food, laughter, music. We lazed under the trees, tuning into news of German victories echoing across the front. We were proud to be part of something massive. And when the field post finally came, every man's face lit up. That night, we sat atop the Panzer, Hans Graupel playing the accordion. He played songs of home. We didn't talk. We just sat there in silence and dreamed. The next morning would be the beginning of everything. Along the roadside, children stood and waved as we passed by. Were we their liberators? At the time, we truly believed it. We thought we were freeing these people from Bolshevism, rescuing them from something darker than war itself. Their smiles seemed to prove it. By 1800 hours, we reached the Druth, a quiet tributary feeding the great Dnieper. The wooden bridge along the Rollbahn had been torched not long before our arrival. Its beams still smouldered, the air thick with the scent of damp smoke and charred pine. Across the water, we could see Russian infantry. There was a brief exchange of fire. Then, just as quickly, silence. Our light platoon, Panzer IIs, was dispatched to scout for a ford. They found one roughly 700 metres upstream, but it was a gamble. The crossing began just before dusk. It turned into chaos. Some of our panzers sank so deep that water poured in through the driver's hatches. The far bank was marshland. Mud swallowed our machines up to their running wheels. It took back-breaking effort and towing cables to pull them free. A dense forest grew right to the edge of the river, giving us barely any room to maneuver. But somehow, 3 of our panzers reached the rollbahn on the far side, long after nightfall. The rest of the company was still stuck, engines groaning in the bog. We took up watch through the night, lying low with machine pistols at the ready, the gunners of the other vehicles beside us. We were almost face to face with the Russians and didn't realize it until the sun came up. At dawn, we captured several of them, shocked, disarmed and visibly relieved. They were glad it was over. 4th July 1941. At 02:30, the rest of the company finally caught up, along with a platoon from 4th Company sent to reinforce us. It had been a miserable night for everyone. No time for coffee or rations. The field kitchen hadn't made it across. The commander gathered us quickly. Stary Baichau and the Dnieper bridge. That's the objective. We leave in 15 minutes. The engines rumbled to life. At the front was Lieutenant Koenig's panzer from ein platoon, followed by Feldwebel Schneider, and then ours. Panzer of the company commander. I was proud to sit in the gunner's seat. Behind us trailed the 2nd and 3rd platoons, the heavier tanks from the 4th Company and the light platoon bringing up the rear. The air was crisp that morning, but inside the panzer it was a furnace. With hatches closed, the heat became unbearable. The loader and I sat with our hatches open for as long as we could. The commander stood in the turret, eyes sweeping the horizon. Woods flanked the rollbahn, thick and ominous. We all expected an ambush. Every shadow held potential death. Eventually the trees gave way to fields of corn. The spearhead halted briefly to observe. Then came gunfire. I've never moved faster. 1 second I was leaning out, the next I was sealed inside, heart racing. Ahead of us, 2 Russian anti-tank guns had opened fire, but they were positioned poorly and dealt with quickly. Infantry continued shooting, but they lacked the weapons to harm us. We pressed on. The clock was ticking. If the Russians had time to blow the bridge, the entire advance could collapse. We reached a fork in the road and veered off the rollbahn, heading cross-country towards Stary Baichau. A small stream lay ahead, spanned by a wooden bridge. We crossed it, but the 6th Panzer was too much. The bridge collapsed beneath its weight. We were split, 5 panzers forward, the rest stuck. There was no easy detour, and forging a new crossing would take precious time. Oberleutnant von Kossel made the decision. We'd push on alone. It was risky, but surprise was our best weapon. We advanced faster now. Exhausted, I slumped in my seat. I hadn't slept at all the night before, and the heat lulled me into unconsciousness. The loader was out cold too. The commander let us rest. He only shook me awake when the town came into view. Stary Baichau. We expected resistance, but nothing came. The Soviets had assumed the German attack was focused on Mogilev to the north. They hadn't expected anything here. We, 5 lone panzers, were about to hit a key crossing on the Dnieper, and we were nearly unopposed. The terrain opened up, flat and visible. Then we spotted it, a deep anti-tank ditch surrounding the town, but it wasn't complete. We slipped through one of the gaps in single file. Still, no enemy. That silence, it gnaws at you worse than combat. We scanned the area, every nerve alert. I kept my eye to the sight. The telescopic lensmen and soldiers, all trying to escape across the Dnieper. It was pandemonium. A lorry loaded with spirit barrels swerved in front of us. I fired. It exploded instantly, flames consuming the street. We drove on, swerving, skidding, until our spearhead found the bridge access road. We floored it for the final 100 meters, and there it was, intact. The Dnieper bridge. The entire area was crawling with panicked Russians. Soldiers jumped off the bridge into the water. Civilians scattered. Our commander radioed in the last message Abteilung would hear from us that day. We are crossing the Dnieper, establishing bridgehead. We stormed across, smashing through anything in our path. The far side offered no resistance. We halted only briefly, scanning the terrain. Ahead, the road rose along an embankment. To the sides, dense, marshy underbrush. Then, another bridge, about 2 kilometers ahead. It wasn't on the map. Von Kossel ordered the last panzer to hold the current bridge while the remaining 4 advanced. We didn't know it, but I-Abteilung had fallen far behind. They'd run into heavy street fighting in Stary Baichau and wouldn't reach the Dnieper until hours later. Worse still, we had stumbled into the mouth of the so-called Stalin Line, a deep network of Soviet fortifications, artillery, anti-tank emplacements, infantry trenches, all positioned with brutal efficiency along the river. At Stary Baichau alone, there were 65 anti-tank guns trained on the bridge, and we had 5 panzers. But in that moment, we didn't know. We were already on the far side. The die had been cast. The bridge was ours, and the Soviet web was starting to awaken. We crawled slowly toward the bridge, inch by inch, using every fold and mound of earth as cover. The terrain offered almost nothing, just scorched grass, dips in the soil, and burnt-out silence. Up ahead, Unteroffizier Plötscher was leading the way when suddenly he disappeared. Then came his whispered voice. He had found something, a hole, half covered in dirt, barely visible. One by one, we slid inside after him. It was just large enough for a man to crawl through, and before long, the Russians couldn't see us anymore. Only Feldwebel Görler continued toward the bridge. I never saw him again. Whether he was taken prisoner or gunned down, we didn't know. The tunnel plunged us into darkness. At first, we didn't know where it led. It felt like a dead end. We crouched in silence, lined up shoulder to shoulder, unable to see more than the vague outline of the man in front. We were sure the Russians would find us. Our own lines were far behind. The bridge was swarming with enemy troops. We were cut off and buried in the heart of Soviet positions. No one said it out loud, but I think we all thought the same thing. This was the end. The silence wasn't just from fear. It was the sound of 8 men quietly preparing themselves to die. But I had made one thing clear to myself. I would not be taken prisoner. If it came to it, I would fight until the end. As I sat in the tunnel, counting the silhouettes behind and before me, I recognized who had made it. Oberleutnant von Kossel, Unteroffizier Plötscher, Unteroffizier Vetter, Obergefreiters Turbanisch and Ostwald, and the Panzerschützen Markgraf and Hoffmann. Ahead of me were Renner and Büchner. Then it happened. A Russian civilian, wounded and moaning, stumbled to the tunnel entrance and collapsed right in front of Renner and Büchner. He was bleeding, crying out, drawing attention with every breath. We shouted forward, "Shut him up or kill him!" But it was too late. The Russians had started sweeping the ground in formation, searching for survivors, like hunters beating a field. Moments later, we heard them right at the opening. "Ruki vech! Hands up! Davey! Davey!" Quickly, the wounded civilian crawled out of the tunnel. Through the slit of light, I saw the Russian boots, black, mud-covered, moving right outside. Renner and Büchner obeyed the orders, crawling out with their hands raised. I felt a hand grip my shoulder behind me, someone trying to keep me from moving. For 1 second, just one, I was certain this was it. I gripped my pistol. If a grenade came in, I would throw it back. If a soldier came crawling, I would shoot. We were cornered animals now. And then fate intervened. A German fighter plane roared overhead and opened fire with its machine guns, strafing the ground. The Russians scattered, yelling, diving for cover. That aircraft saved us. Their interest in the tunnel vanished in the chaos. Inside, we sat frozen, some trembling, others slumped in despair. I only knew I had to stay calm. The moment I cracked, everyone else would follow. Vetter took position at the entrance with my pistol. I crept up to von Kossel, who whispered how he had escaped our panzer. Our loader, Hofweber, hadn't made it. He was hit just as he opened his hatch. His screams still echoed in the commander's mind. Of our driver, Feldwebel Volz, and the radio man Hartmann, we knew nothing. Later, we'd hear that Volz had been taken prisoner and rescued 10 days later during the capture of Smolensk. I handed my sidearm to Vetter and told the commander, if it comes to it, first shoot me, then yourself. It may sound extreme, but in that moment it was simply truth. I meant it. I believe he understood, even if he never answered. We remained in the dark for 90 minutes. No sign of our comrades. The firefights above flared up again and again. Each time we thought it must be our rescue, but nothing. Eventually, we pushed forward another few meters and found the tunnel led to a bunker. Small, only 2 meters by 2, dug into the slope at road level. We had no idea it was even here. It was just tall enough to sit up in. The ceiling was thick with timber and turf. Through a small, firing slit, we could see the foreland, the Dnieper, and the faint ruins of Stary Baikal beyond the river. We pulled a jute sack across the tunnel entrance to feel more concealed. 8 of us now lay cramped and motionless inside that bunker. Vetter sat near the sack with the pistol, ready. I lay at the slit, observing. The Dnieper flowed calmly below. Russian voices echoed outside, close, sometimes just above us. We heard boots. A patrol passed overhead. One man stamped twice. Earth crumbled onto our heads. Had they heard the hollow sound beneath their feet? We didn't know. They spoke loudly, animated, then silence. Had we been discovered? We quickly packed earth into the slit, sealing it off. It was pitch black now, but at least it helped our nerves. We dug shallow depressions with our hands in the soil to lie a bit more comfortably. It gave us something to do, something to focus on. When the Russian artillery opened up again, the walls vibrated. A heavy blast sent a ripple through the floor. "They've blown the bridge," someone whispered. And just like that, all hope of rescue evaporated. We tried to stay positive, whispering, encouraging each other, but the air was stifling, the heat unbearable. We'd had no water for hours. My stomach cramped with hunger and sickness. At times I crawled back into the tunnel just to relieve myself. It was humiliating. Eventually we heard a machine gun firing above us, an MG-34. The familiar sound gave us false hope, but soon we realized the Russians had salvaged it from one of our panzers. They were using our own weapons against us. We were wrecks, mentally and physically. I had to believe something would intervene. I'd never learned to pray, but in those hours I started to think maybe I had been protected all along, that something, call it luck, fate, whatever, had carried me this far. Von Kossel's wound was worsening. We had no bandages. We discussed swimming the Dnieper under moonlight, but it was impossible. The Russians were everywhere. The terrain was wide open, a suicide mission. We waited. Night came, then the sounds returned. Footsteps, grazing. For a second we feared more Russians, but no, it was a cow, quietly chewing grass atop our bunker. We laughed silently, tears in our eyes. Nearby the Russians still rummaged through our wrecked panzers. I went to the tunnel entrance and watched them light lamps inside the hulls, likely looting everything. My camera, our code books, rations, gear. The scene made my stomach twist. Then it was morning again. 5 July, 0400 hours, the perfect time for a German counterattack, but no gunfire came, no tanks, nothing. At 0500 we accepted the truth. No one was coming, not today. We decided we'd make a break for it that night. Under cover of darkness, we would crawl to the Dnieper and swim. There was no other option. Hunger we could endure, but thirst was killing us. Our mouths were dry, our bodies limp. Escape was our last hope. We planned it carefully. We would exit through the firing slit. It had to be widened. We set the time for 2200 hours. Maybe, just maybe, the Russians would be less alert. The front had been quiet for over a day now. They might believe no Germans were left. It was our only chance.